Old Santee Canal Park, located in Moncks Corner, South Carolina, opened in 1989. This 195-acre park commemorates the building of the first true canal in America and showcases the area's extensive history and habitat. Among its attractions are the Stony Landing House, 4 miles of boardwalk, boat rentals, an interpretive center, a Revolutionary War fort, and a museum. In addition, the park also hosts several workshops and seasonal events throughout the year. During this vlog, I will show the park's 2023 Christmas celebration while talking about the history of the park's land and the Colleton family who owned it. The land the park now sits on was initially inhabited by the Edisto tribe, who were a subset of the Cusabo tribe. This tribe, like many others in South Carolina, were mainly agricultural. Prior to the arrival of the English, the Spanish actually tried to establish a mission to convert the Edisto people. This mission was along the St. Pierre Creek near modern-day Edisto Island, but it was abandoned after only a year. While the Edisto were initially the prominent group on this land, many other different indigenous groups also utilized the land. This was because of the presence of the Cherokee Path, also referred to as the Congaree Path, which was an ancient path used for trade and travel. In fact, in colonial America, it became the primary route for trade from Charleston to Columbia. It was also the way to reach the Cherokee towns and territories along the upper Kiowa River and its tributaries. Initially, during colonial times, the path was first used to transport livestock, deer skins, lumber, turpentine, and the enslaved Native Americans. However, later during colonial times, the path was used to transport the enslaved people of African descent and cash crops like rice and indigo. In 1678, the first official owner of this property became Peter Colleton. This 4,432-acre property was at that time known as Farallon Botany. Peter was born in 1635 and was the eldest son of Catherine and John Colleton's 7 children. Peter actually acquired the land because of his father John. As a younger man, John had notably rose in ranks while fighting for the king during the English Civil War. Unfortunately, after the war, in which John's side lost, John's property was seized, and he and his family left England for Barbados. Luckily for John, after Cromwell's death and Charles II was taken out of exile and made king, John was knighted. Then, in 1663, John became one of the 8 Lord Proprietors who were gifted South Carolina. In an effort to reacquire some of his lost fortune, John was actively interested in the successful development of South Carolina. He even encouraged some of the prominent Barbados families to come to South Carolina to help settle it and establish a cash crop like the sugarcane of Barbados. As a result, as these settlers moved to South Carolina, they brought with them their enslaved Africans. In business, John was described as a merchant, as he was involved in the Royal African Company. During the 1650s, Sir John Colleton had the Colleton Mansion also referred to as Colleton Castle, built. In 1667, at the age of 59, John became the first of the original 8 Lord Proprietors of South Carolina to pass away. Notably, of John's children, 3 of his sons moved to South Carolina, while Peter inherited the title of Landgrave and 2nd Baron. Peter's brother Thomas, who also moved to America, served as a colonel in the 17th Regiment of Foot. In addition, Peter's brother James also made a name for himself in the South Carolina colony. Upon James's arrival to the colony, he put a stop to a planned expedition against the Spanish. This organized retaliation was going to take place in St. Augustine for an earlier attack against Charlestown. Interestingly, James also became the colonial governor of South Carolina from 1686 to 1690. Besides the little over 4,000 acres of fair-lawn botany, Peter also had 12,000 acres. As an adult, Peter married Elizabeth Leslie of Barbados. Elizabeth had been the widow of the renowned artist William Johnston. As far as children, I have read that the couple had 1 son and 1 daughter. However, I have also found evidence that they may have had 7 children. Peter, like his father, had interest in both Barbados and Carolina and spent much of his time in both colonies. In addition, like his father, he was described as a merchant. During Peter's life, he worked within 3 largely monopolized companies, which included the Royal African Company, the Royal Adventurers into Africa, and the Hudson Bay Company. Besides being a merchant, Peter was also a member of the Council of Barbados in 1664 to 1684. In 1677, Peter was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society. This society was an organization in London for individuals who made a substantial contribution to improving knowledge in mathematics, engineering, and science. Furthermore, Peter also served in the UK Parliament. Besides being involved in both Barbados and South Carolina, in 1644, Peter was appointed as assistant and secretary to the governor of North Carolina. The following year, in 1665, Peter finally arrived in Albemarle County and happened to be there when his father John passed away in England. In 1670, after the passing of the active governor, Peter was named governor of Albemarle County, after which Peter governed until May of 1672, when he went to England to describe the problems in the colony and decided not to return to North Carolina. In the end, while some sources assert that Sir Peter Colleton died in 1679, most agree that the 2nd Baron lived until 1694, when he passed away at the mere age of 41. Of Peter's children, his fair-lawn land and title was given to his 7-year-old son John. Interestingly, John was born on the fair-lawn property and is sometimes referred to as Honorable John. As a result of being so young when he inherited the land, John's sister Catherine saw over his assets. Catherine did so by contacting Robert Ball, who she had managed the South Carolina estate until John reached maturity. By this time, it is written that Fairlawn had been settled with livestock and was in the condition for culture and utilization. By the year of 1700, John married a lady by the name of Elizabeth Snell. She was the daughter of Reverend John Snell. Later, by 1708, John was deemed old enough to handle his estate. Interestingly, his brother Peter established the nearby land known as Edsom. Together, John and Elizabeth had 4 children. John, who lived to be quite old, unfortunately had to see 3 of his sons die before him. Sir John and his family lived in the family mansion named South Lawn. It was located on the Fairlawn Botany land in St. John's Parish of Berkeley County. While John and his family did call Berkeley County home for a while, he did return to England, where he was considered the 6th wealthiest citizen in his town of Exeter. On December 5th of 1718, John was granted a new barony known as Devil's Elbow in Granville County, South Carolina. Tragically, it was during John's ownership between 1750 and 1751 when the Edisto tribe disappeared from the land. This was due to disease and displacement caused by the attack from neighboring tribes. While in South Carolina in 1755, John passed away at the age of 85. He was on his Fairlawn plantation and is buried at Biggin Cemetery. Interestingly, his wife also died in the same year, 5 months after him, and was laid to rest beside him. The next owner of the Fairlawn property was John's son, John, the 4th Baron. Unlike the previous Colletons, this John lived on Fairlawn almost all of his life, returning to England only occasionally. During one of his visits to England, John married Anne Fulford. Anne was the daughter of Francis Fulford of Great Fulford, Devon. Together, John and Anne had 1 child, a daughter named Louisa Carolina. Unfortunately for John, by 1771, by an act of Parliament, he was having their marriage dissolved. At the time, this was said to be a result of his wife's infidelity. However, don't feel bad for John. He did go on to marry a second time in 1774. In fact, he had already fathered an illegitimate child with his second wife named William. His second wife, named Jane Mutter, also happened to be his daughter's governess. After John and Jane's marriage in England, John moves Jane to South Carolina, where he goes on to father another son named John Snell. Unfortunately for John, his second marriage may have also not been a happy one. On July 13th, 1776, while in South Carolina, John wrote his will, in which he wrote several sentences and then crossed them out. One of these sentences claimed his wife was unhappy and that he only wished to give her a small inheritance. In addition, as a man with trust issues, he goes as far as to write that he doubts that her children are truly his. Then, in 1777, just a short time later, Sir John passes away at the mere age of 40. He was then buried at the Biggins Church Cemetery. Interestingly, unlike most wills of the time, John ended up leaving his entire estate in both America and Great Britain to his daughter, Louisa Carolina Colleton. Unfortunately for Louisa, she was still a minor. As a result, she was left in the care of the executors of the will until she came of age. However, I have also read that it seems during the same year John passed, his daughter left South Carolina for England. Regardless of this contradicting information, in 1777, at the age of only 14, the beautiful Louisa Carolina inherited a valuable estate on two sides of the Atlantic. Unfortunately for Louisa, her ownership of her father's estate began during the Revolutionary War. While Louisa's father, John, was a loyalist, he was not active in the conflict. While Sir John Colleton, son of the Honorable J.C. Colleton, inherited the grounds at the onset of the American Revolution, it wasn't until Louisa owned the property that the British invaded. In fact, eventually, Fairlawn Estate was seized by the British. However, it wasn't the seizure of the grounds that outraged many. It was the cruelty that the British showed the women, regardless of their loyalist or patriot standings. In fact, it is even documented because of the harm done to the women that Major Patrick Ferguson had to threaten to hang undisciplined soldiers. Even Louisa's stepmother, Jane, who was living at the Colleton mansion, also referred to as Colleton Castle, was attacked. It is said that she had her hand cut and was very bruised. In April of 1780, on Louisa's property, the British constructed Fort Fairlawn to protect river access and disrupt supplies. In addition, by the summer, the British had turned the Fairlawn plantation into a hospital, as well as began to use Biggin's Church for storage. During this time, both the church and what was called Colleton Castle was burnt down. According to Louisa Carolina, the British destroyed the Colleton Castle and surrounding buildings when they departed. She wrote, "They burnt down the mansion and destroyed every building, including a town built on the barony for the residence of several hundred people belonging to the estate, with the granaries and mills. On this occasion, in addition to the furniture, paintings, books, and plates, a large sum of money, which was in my father's strong box, and even my jewels were lost to me, either destroyed or plundered." After this, it appears that Louisa ended up back in England. During her return trip to England in 1787, Louisa married British Admiral Richard Graves, a dashing naval officer. Admiral Graves came from a family who at one time owned a mansion house and estate called the Greaves of Graves. Richard was the son of a clergyman and the youngest of 4 brothers who all went to sea at a very young age. During the Colonial War, Captain Richard Graves found himself engaged in conflict many times. During one incident, he was on a ship bound for New York. The ship was in desperate need of repairs and began to take on water. It just so happened that during this time, the ship was also attacked, and Captain Graves received a severe wound. Regardless, after the conflict, the ship was able to successfully arrive to New York before sinking. After Louisa and Richard's marriage, they went on to have 10 children. Despite being beautiful and receiving her father's inheritance, Louisa's life was far from perfect. For example, during her life, one of her children passed away. In addition, while on a ship, she was even captured by French privateers. Over the years, despite her best endeavors, her fortune did dwindle. It is written that this may have been due to her husband's frivolous lifestyle, the Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, as well as a son dubbed the prodigal son. On Christmas Day, 1822, at the age of 59, Louisa passed away in London. The next to inherit the Fairlawn property was Louisa's son Samuel Graves. Samuel was born in 1788. As an adult, Samuel married Susan McPherson. While little is known about Samuel or his wife, they did have 2 children. Tragically, their first baby passed away after only 4 days and was buried at St. Michael's in downtown Charleston. Samuel's surviving child was a daughter named Carolina McPherson Graves, who was born in 1821. When Samuel passed away in 1832, he was only 35 years old, after which he was laid to rest beside their lost infant at St. Michael's. While Samuel was the last to own the Fairlawn property, Carolina would be the last Colleton left in America. While Carolina did marry Loftus C. Clifford, Esquire, it is unclear what happened between them. In 1821, at the age of 86, Carolina had lived to be older than any of her Colleton descendants previously mentioned. Upon her death, Carolina was laid to rest at the Magnolia Cemetery as the last member of the American Colleton Dynasty. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, and as always, thanks for watching.